Maribel.
Steven.
Hey.
So good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Yes.
Thanks for being here with us.
Of course.
So, Maribel, you're a folklorist.
That's right.
And I've heard you talk about thinking like a folklorist. What does that mean, to think like a folklorist?
Yeah, that's a really nice phrase, and it means a lot to me, actually. It means that you see the world from the point of view of someone who's interested in seeing the overlook.
Seeing the overlook.
The overlook. To paying attention to the things that others might leave on the sidelines or in the darkness. And most of those things that social science or other forms of higher art analysis may want to leave on the table or overlook happen to be the things of everyday life, the way that people really live their lives.
So you often talk about that as hidden in plain view.
Hidden in plain view is one of the expressions that our field of folklorists uses to express.
Give me an
that.
example of what that might be.
Well, one of the interesting examples is food.
Okay.
For example, the fact that we all eat every day.
Right.
And it's really backdrop for many of us. In fact, one of the phenomena that we know now exists in the world is people eat on the run without paying any attention to
Right.
the fact that this is actually a ritualistic type of activity.
Why is that important to us to have to have such order in our everyday, to have such ceremony that maybe we're not even aware of?
Well, it's part of how we organize our meaningful universe through ritual and through patterns and through signs and codes that are the visible tools we have to communicate meaning. I mean, if you think about it, there's a meaning that is inside of us. I know what the meaning of something is inside my heart, for my family, for my job. But I am powerless to communicate that meaning that is inside me to anyone else outside me,
Right.
unless I utilize signs and symbols and habits and patterns and rituals.
And story.
And stories.
Right.
And narratives.
I mean, I've also heard you say honor the aesthetics of the ordinary.
Yes.
Right. So we have stages, and we sit and we watch people perform, and we applaud when it's over, and we say that's this extraordinary thing, creative act. It moves us. But you're saying that there are other creative acts every day that we should bring as much honor to.
Well, one of the big moments of revelation in the arts field in the last 25, 30 years was precisely how much art was happening outside of art-sanctioned spaces.
And what would that look like?
That would look like a church on
Right.
Sunday mornings, you know?
and not just the singing, but the whole theater of church.
The theater of church, the sermon.
That is a piece of art.
And the sermon, the best sermons use proverbs.
Right.
Because they connect with people's realities, right? And we know this from Frederick Douglass onward. This sense of Dr. Martin Luther King, the sense that the phrasing of certain inspirational messages to move people to action. That's folklore. That's folk life.
So the folk, in that sense, we tend to think of the folk as somehow being exotic or being up in the mountains or being down by the river, but the folk is in our office. It's in our home. It's in our government agencies. All of those things are organized with ritual and symbol.
Absolutely, and interesting. There's some researchers who have even looked at Wall Street,
right,
and come up with the fact that there's a certain way of behaving as a stockbroker,
right,
that is a whole cultural embodiment of an ideology.
So as a folklorist, you can study farmers and you can study bankers.
Exactly.
And so I would imagine, as you're trying to advance social change or community development, that there's a role for folklore and there's a role for understanding this sort of culture that comes from every day. So when you think about community development and creative placemaking or creative placekeeping, what's the role of the folklorist in that space?
I have heard some of my colleagues speak about the fact that in the history of the civil rights movement, for example, no one has written the authoritative history of the place of and the role of potlucks
Potlucks.
in bringing people together.
Yeah.
And Dr. King spoke about the table of brotherhood, about breaking bread together, about the table of reconciliation. We know those as phrases, but they actually had a material reality behind them. It actually brought whites and blacks around church potlucks, talking together about how to change social conditions. And sure, maybe it would have been a simple meeting and it didn't have to be a potluck. But
Right.
the fact that there was a glue, a
Right.
social bonding that was bringing people together, and in bringing food into the mixture of that, for example, we know that it allowed for the tasting of what freedom could look like.
That's powerful.
Not just as a metaphor, but as a tasting of fellowship, you know? What did it feel like to be with other people?
So a folklorist might observe that a breaking of bread might be a powerful way to get a community to reconcile, to envision together, to
Yes.
And that's a methodology. It's a tool
right.
that a community has that they might not be thinking about in city government or in the planning office.
Absolutely, and one of the examples is about the presence of immigrants in many of our urban cities, where the first thing that a person knows how to do is how to cook a meal from their home country
Right.
and serve it to others and potentially open a small business.
Right.
So you have food businesses being one of the first entryway into civic participation,
Right.
as we know it, and restaurants becoming cultural centers where people gather to
Right.
form,
Not just to eat, but to
not just to eat, but
to meet.
solidarity.
to plan, to
Absolutely.
protest,
Absolutely.
to resist. So how do you feel like you want to use your own creativity to change the world?
Oh, wow.
It's a big question,
It's
but
a beautiful question. And you, of course, that is the question, right? That what can each one of us bring to that intention? And in my own practice, what I've tried to do is to articulate the value. I went to graduate school hungry for language. That I was already doing artistic work and I would even say I was doing already community leadership work before I went to graduate school. But I went to graduate school hungry to master the language that would allow me to articulate value for others who may not understand it. And that has been the greatest pleasure always. Sometimes that is done through grant writing.
right.
It's not very glamorous,
But important.
but it's work that
Well-
you feel gives voice to somebody who may not have the ability to be in that boardroom or in that grant panel speaking.
Well, I think for me, because of your creativity, you have certainly made many invisible things more visible
Yes,
to
great.
us, and given voice to people and practices, and that sometimes are overlooked as we either through the rush of our daily life or because we just simply are all imprisoned in our own conventions and our
Yes.
own culture, our own meaning, and so we miss other people's. And it's a beautiful thing to see it, and you've
Well,
certainly
your
spent
own
your career
writing helped
revealing
me
it.
get there. Your
Well-
own thinking, and I remember before we met in person, thinking there's something really interesting about someone who's interested in mapping creativity in spaces that are not always where we should be looking at. I don't know if it was you or your colleague Bill Ivey who said, or maybe I heard it say, that one of the most important cultural agencies in the United States is not the National Endowment for the Arts, it's the IRS.
Yeah.
Was that you?
That was probably Bill.
The IRS is the one that regulates the capacity of people
Right.
to take the tax deduction that make possible a lot of the work.
Yeah.
Very few art leaders have ever paid
Thought of
attention
the IRS as a
as a target
Right.
of their particular advocacy efforts,
yeah.
right?
Well, I mean,
So
You're either allowed to give money to arts organizations and deduct, or give your artwork and claim the value of it. Or, yeah, those are real policies that we often
as a folklorist,
ignore.
reading that literature
Yeah.
and inserting myself into people like yourself who were thinking that way was a real breakthrough for me.
Well, then we both had breakthroughs because of the other. So, in the spirit of Thanksgiving and generosity,
Yes.
at least the way that the holiday has been conceived for us,
Yes.
thank you, and thanks for being with us today.
Gracias.
Gracias.